The grand chamber of Zenith Prime stretched wide enough to hold a dozen human battleships side by side. Commander Daniel Brooke stood at the center of the crystalline floor with his hands bound behind his back. Around him in a perfect circle sat the 12 members of the Galactic Council. Each one represented a species that had ruled the stars for thousands of years, before humanity even discovered fire. Their eyes glowed with different colors as they stared down at the human who dared to break their most sacred law. Daniel kept his face calm, even though his heart pounded in his chest. He knew this moment would come when he made his choice 3 weeks ago. The small moon of Terra 9 had been dying, and its primitive inhabitants had no way to escape. The Council's law was clear and absolute. Advanced species could not interfere with less developed worlds, no matter what the circumstances were. But Daniel had looked into the eyes of those innocent beings and saw the same fear and hope that any human child would show. He could not let them die when he had the power to save them. Lieutenant Karen Hayes stood 10 meters behind him in the observer section. Her fingers gripped the railing so hard that her knuckles turned white. She had begged Daniel not to do it and warned him that the Council would never forgive such a violation. But Daniel had smiled at her with that gentle expression he always wore, and told her that some rules were wrong and needed to be broken. Now she watched helplessly as the beings who controlled half the galaxy prepared to kill the best man she had ever known. Councillor Vrantik of the Saurian Empire rose from his seat. His scaled body reflected the blue light of the chamber as he spoke in a voice that echoed like thunder. The translation device in Daniel's ear converted the alien's speech into words he could understand. Vrantik declared that humanity had proven itself unworthy of galactic citizenship. Humans were too young and too emotional to be trusted with the responsibilities that came with star travel. They acted on impulse and feelings instead of logic and law. Daniel's crime was not just a violation of Council rules, but proof that his entire species was dangerous. The other counselors nodded their agreement. One by one, they voiced their support for the harshest punishment available. Molecular disintegration was reserved for only the worst criminals in galactic history. The condemned would be broken down atom by atom until nothing remained. There would be no body to bury and no grave to visit. It was as if the person had never existed at all. Daniel listened to them pass judgment without showing any emotion on his face. When they finally finished speaking, he asked for permission to make a final statement. Vrantik seemed amused by this request and granted it with a wave of his clawed hand. The Saurian probably expected the human to beg for mercy or cry, like the inferior creature he believed all humans to be. Instead, Daniel stood straight and spoke. In a clear voice that carried through the entire chamber, he told them that he did not regret his actions and would make the same choice again if given the chance. The beings of Terra 9 were alive because of him, and that was worth any price. He said that the Council claimed to represent justice and civilization, but their law was neither just nor civilized. Any rule that demanded you watch innocent people die when you could save them was a rule that should not exist. Then Daniel's voice changed and grew harder. He looked directly at Vrantik and told the Council that they had made a terrible mistake. Earth was not the weak and primitive world they believed it to be. Humanity had hidden its true strength for good reason. The Council thought humans were harmless newcomers who needed guidance and protection. They were wrong. Daniel said that his death would trigger consequences that would shake the foundations of their ancient empire. He advised them to show mercy not for his sake, but for their own. Vrantik laughed at this statement, and the sound was like rocks grinding together. He called Daniel's words the desperate bluff of a dying animal. The Council had observed Earth for 2 decades and knew exactly what humanity was capable of. They had primitive weapons and basic ships that could barely cross their own star system. Even if every human vessel united against the Council, they would be crushed like insects beneath a boot. Humanity should be grateful that the Council chose to only execute one criminal instead of blockading Earth as punishment for this violation. Daniel smiled sadly and said nothing more. He had delivered his warning and knew they would not listen. The Council had ruled the galaxy for so long that they could not imagine anyone challenging their power. Their arrogance would be their downfall, but Daniel would not live to see it. He had accepted that truth when he loaded those frightened aliens onto his ship and carried them to safety. Karen felt tears running down her face as the execution platform rose from the floor beneath Daniel's feet. Energy beams extended from the 12 council seats and met at a point directly above his head. The technology was ancient and precise and completely painless according to the council. The victim simply ceased to exist between one heartbeat and the next. She wanted to scream at them or rush forward to stand beside Daniel, but she knew it would change nothing. The council had made their decision and nothing in the galaxy could alter it now. Daniel looked back at her one last time. His eyes were gentle and full of understanding. He mouthed 3 words that only she could see. Protocol Omega activated. Then he nodded once as if giving her permission to do what came next. Karen's hand moved to the communication device hidden in her jacket pocket. Her fingers flew across the keypad, entering the encryption code that only she and Daniel knew. The energy beams grew brighter and began to pulse with increasing speed. Daniel's body started to glow with the same light as if he was transforming into pure energy. The process would take exactly 30 seconds from start to finish. Karen hit the final key on her device and sent the message racing across the stars toward Earth. 4 words that would change everything. Protocol Omega. They killed him. Daniel Brooks smiled one last time as his form dissolved into particles of light. The council members watched with satisfaction as the human vanished completely. Vrantic declared that justice had been served and humanity had learned an important lesson about respecting the laws of civilized society. The other councilors agreed and began to discuss returning to their normal business of governing the galaxy. None of them noticed the small light blinking on, Karen's device confirming that her message had been received. None of them saw the expression on her face change from grief to something cold and determined, and none of them understood that in the deep darkness beneath a mountain range on Earth, ancient machines were waking up after decades of sleep. The Doomsday Protocol had begun and there was no way to stop it now. The Galactic Council had just made the worst mistake in their 12,000-year history, and they would not realize it until far too late. 2 days before Daniel, Brooks stood in that chamber facing Death Admiral. Peter Grant sat in a conference room buried 3 kilometers beneath the Pacific Ocean. The room had no windows and only one entrance that required 6 different security checks to pass through. 15 people sat around the long metal table, and each one of them carried secrets that could reshape the galaxy. They were the core team of the Veil Initiative, and today they were discussing something that none of them wanted to think about. The large screen on the wall showed Daniel's face along with columns of data and probability calculations. Admiral Grant looked at the numbers with tired eyes that had seen too many wars and too many good people die. He was 70 years old, but the stress of his position made him look even older. His gray hair was cut military short, and his uniform was perfectly pressed despite the early hour. He had been awake for 30 hours straight waiting for news from Zenith Prime. Dr. Lisa Morgan stood at the front of the room with a laser pointer in her hand. She was 42 years old with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and glasses that she did not really need but wore out of habit from her younger days. She had been the chief scientist on the Veil Initiative since its creation 15 years ago. Her voice was steady as she walked the group through the scenarios, but everyone in the room could hear the strain beneath her calm exterior. The truth was simple and terrifying. Humanity had been lying to the Galactic Council since the day of first contact. When the Council's ships appeared in Earth's orbit 20 years ago, they expected to find a primitive species that had just barely achieved faster than light travel. That was exactly what humanity showed them. Old ships with simple drives and weapons that looked impressive to humans, but were laughable compared to Council technology. The Council had smiled with their various alien faces and welcomed Earth as a junior member of galactic civilization. What the Council did not know was that humanity had been traveling the stars for almost 200 years before that meeting. Human colonies existed on 40 different worlds scattered across space in systems the Council had never explored. Human ships could cross distances in hours that took Council vessels weeks to travel. Human weapons could punch through shields that the Council considered unbreakable, and human scientists had unlocked secrets of physics that the ancient races believed were impossible. The decision to hide all of this had come from the very top of Earth's government. President Helen Carter and her advisors understood that showing their true strength would make humanity a target. The Council ruled through a combination of advanced technology and overwhelming force. Any species that could challenge that dominance would be crushed before they became a real threat. So Earth chose to play the role of the weak newcomer, while they learned everything they could about the galaxy's true powers. For 20 years, humanity had maintained the deception. They traded with Council worlds using outdated technology and asked innocent questions about things they already understood. They sent diplomats who acted impressed by alien achievements that humanity had surpassed decades ago. They built a reputation as a friendly but unremarkable species that posed no danger to anyone, and all the while they gathered intelligence and positioned assets throughout council space. Dr. Morgan brought up a new image on the screen. It showed a star map with hundreds of red dots scattered across dozens of systems. Each dot represented a human agent or a hidden weapons platform or a sleeper ship waiting for activation. The web of preparation was vast and had taken years to construct. Every trade mission had included intelligence officers. Every cultural exchange had involved military analysts. Every treaty negotiation had been an opportunity to plant listening devices or recruit informants. The Veil Initiative was not just about hiding human strength. It was about preparing for the day when that strength would need to be revealed. The architects of the program had understood that eventually something would force Earth to show its hand. They had created the Doomsday Protocol as insurance against the worst possible scenario. If the Council ever executed a human envoy without just cause, it would trigger an automatic response that could not be stopped or recalled. Daniel Brooks had known about the protocol. He had volunteered for the envoy position with full knowledge of what it meant. Admiral Grant had tried to talk him out of it during their last meeting on Earth. Daniel had just smiled and said that someone needed to be willing to pay the price if humanity was going to stand for something. The Council needed to learn that humans could not be pushed around or threatened into submission. If his death could teach that lesson, then it was a death worth dying. The Admiral's communication device buzzed with an incoming priority message. Everyone in the room went silent as he picked it up and read the short text. 4 words glowed on the small screen. Protocol Omega, they killed him. For a long moment nobody moved or spoke. They had all known this might happen, but hoping for something and preparing for it were very different things. Admiral Grant set down the device and looked at each person around the table. His voice was quiet but filled with authority that came from 4 decades of military service. He said that the protocol was now active and there was no turning back. Everything they had built and prepared for the past 15 years was about to be used. He asked if anyone had objections or concerns they needed to voice before he gave the final orders. Nobody spoke. They all knew what was coming and what it would cost. The galaxy was about to learn the truth about humanity, and the truth would be delivered in fire and steel. Dr. Morgan closed her eyes for a moment and said a silent prayer for Daniel Brooks. Then she opened them and nodded to the Admiral. She was ready to do her part. Admiral Grant activated his command terminal and entered a series of codes that he had memorized years ago, but hoped never to use. Deep beneath the Colorado mountains, a supercomputer that had been waiting in silence suddenly came to life. Its processors began running through millions of calculations per second as it accessed databases and communication networks that spanned human-controlled space. Orders went out to fleet commanders and intelligence officers and sleeper agents across 100 different worlds. Phase 1 of the Doomsday Protocol had a simple objective: show the Council that humanity was not what they believed. Reveal enough strength to make them understand their mistake without destroying everything in the process. The hidden fleets would emerge from their concealment and take positions throughout Council territory. The agents would activate and begin their assigned missions. The weapons platforms would come online and lock onto their designated targets. President Carter appeared on the Admiral's screen with a face that showed no emotion. She had been in an emergency cabinet meeting when the news arrived. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady as she confirmed her authorization for the protocol. She said that Daniel Brooks had been a good man who did what was right even knowing the cost. Now it was Earth's responsibility to make sure his death meant something. The President asked Admiral Grant how long until the Council realized what was happening. He told her that the first human ships would appear over Council worlds within 6 hours. After that, it would take maybe another hour before the Council understood the scale of what they were facing. She nodded and told him to proceed with all phases as planned. There would be no mercy for those who murdered innocents and no forgiveness for the Council's arrogance as the meeting ended and people began moving to their assigned stations. Dr. Morgan stood beside Admiral Grant, looking at the star map on the screen. She said that the galaxy was about to change in ways that nobody could predict. He agreed and added that sometimes change only came through conflict. Humanity had tried to join the galactic community peacefully and had been treated like children who needed supervision. Now they would show the Council what humans were really capable of when pushed too far. The countdown had begun and nothing would stop it now. The emergency alarms in Zenith Prime had not sounded in over 3,000 years. When they began wailing through the corridors of the massive station, every being who heard them froze in confusion and fear. Counselor Vrantik was in his private quarters reviewing trade reports when the noise started. He rushed to his communication terminal and demanded to know what was happening. The response he received made no sense to him at first. Human warships had appeared in 70 different Council systems simultaneously. Not the clumsy transport vessels that Earth used for trade missions, but massive battleships bristling with weapons that should not exist. Each ship was twice the size of the Council's largest dreadnoughts, and their energy signatures showed power outputs that defied known physics. The fleet had simply materialized out of empty space as if they had been invisible until this exact moment. Vrantik's first instinct was that this had to be a mistake or a sensor malfunction. Humanity barely had 30 ships capable of interstellar travel, according to Council intelligence reports. Now his military commanders were telling him that hundreds of human vessels had appeared across Council space. He ordered an immediate meeting of all counselors and told his security team to bring Karen Hayes from her detention cell. The human woman would explain what was happening, or she would join her dead commander in non-existence. The Council chamber filled quickly as the other members arrived with expressions ranging from confusion to outright panic. Counselor Mervana of the Lyran Collective was a being of pure energy, who communicated through light pulses. Even her normally calm glow flickered with agitation as she took her seat. Counselor Dresh of the Tokmar Hive spoke for his entire species through a telepathic link, and his chittering voice carried an edge of fear that Vrantik had never heard before. General Kesthar entered the chamber with a datapad in his four-fingered hands. He was the Council's supreme military commander and had led their fleets to victory in a dozen wars over his 2-century career. His species, the Vrelians, were known for their tactical brilliance and cold logical thinking. But even Kesthar looked shaken as he approached the center of the room to deliver his report. The general brought up a holographic display that showed the current positions of all human vessels detected in Council space. Red markers indicated warships, while blue markers showed support craft, and yellow markers represented unknown vessel types. The map was covered in hundreds of colored dots arranged in what was clearly a carefully planned pattern. Every major Council military installation was bracketed by human ships. Every trade route had human vessels positioned to cut off traffic. Every home world of the 12 Council species had at least 10 human warships in orbit. Kesses there explained that this level of coordination and deployment was impossible for a species that supposedly only achieved faster than light travel 2 decades ago. The logistics alone would require centuries of preparation and resources that Earth claimed not to possess. His analysis suggested only one possible conclusion. Humanity had been deceiving the Council since first contact. Everything Earth had shown them about their technology and capabilities had been a carefully constructed lie. Vrantik slammed his clawed fist on the armrest of his seat hard enough to crack the crystal material. He refused to believe that humans could have fooled the Council for 20 years. The idea was absurd and insulting. His intelligence officers had thoroughly investigated Earth before granting them membership. They had verified that human technology matched what Earth claimed. There had been no signs of deception or hidden capabilities. The general's response was quiet but devastating. He explained that his team had spent the last 4 hours reviewing every interaction between Earth and the Council over the past 2 decades. When examined with the knowledge of what humanity was clearly capable of, the deception became obvious. Every trade delegation had asked questions they already knew the answers to. Every technology exchange had given Earth access to Council systems while providing nothing of real value in return. Every diplomatic meeting had been an intelligence gathering operation disguised as friendly conversation. Counselor Mervana pulsed with bright white light as she demanded to know how many human agents had infiltrated Council space. Kesthar said that his team had identified at least 40 confirmed operatives working in various positions across Council worlds. The actual number was likely much higher. Some of these agents had been in place for over 15 years, which meant humanity had been planning this operation since before official first contact. The doors to the chamber opened and security officers dragged Karen Hayes into the room. She walked with her head held high despite the rough treatment. Her uniform was wrinkled and she had dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep, but her expression was calm and almost peaceful as she looked up at the counselors who had killed her friend and mentor. Frantic rose from his seat and pointed one clawed finger at the human woman. His voice echoed through the chamber as he demanded she explain what humanity thought they were doing. Karen smiled coldly and told him that Earth was responding to an act of war. The council had executed an innocent man for the crime of showing compassion. Now they would learn what it cost to murder a human envoy. The Saurian counselor laughed at her words. He said that Earth would be crushed for this insolence. The council fleet numbered over 10,000 warships and had conquered 100 rebellious species throughout history. Humanity's few hundred vessels would be destroyed and Earth itself would be blockaded until they begged for mercy. He would personally lead the fleet to their primitive little world and watch as they realized their mistake. Karen's smile grew wider as she shook her head slowly. She told Vrantic that he still did not understand the situation. The Doomsday Protocol was not just about ships and weapons. Humanity had spent 20 years preparing for this exact scenario. They had positioned assets throughout Council space that could not be removed or countered. She suggested that he check on the status of his personal flagship before making any threats about leading fleets anywhere. Vrantic's communication device chimed with an urgent message. His face changed color as he read the text. His flagship, the Eternal Dominion, had just suffered a catastrophic reactor failure while docked at the military station above his home world. The massive vessel that had been his pride for 50 years was now a drifting wreck. 3 other counselor ships had experienced similar failures in the last 10 minutes. All of them had been serviced by the same maintenance company over the past year. A company that employed 12 humans in various technical positions. The chamber erupted in chaos as counselors began shouting questions and accusations at each other. Several of them tried to contact their home worlds only to find that communication networks were experiencing mysterious interference. Others demanded that Kessathar launch an immediate attack on the human vessels. The general refused and explained that any attack would likely trigger a response that could devastate Council space. Karen waited until the noise died down before she spoke again. Her voice was soft, but everyone listened. She told them about the quantum collapse devices that humanity had hidden in 3 Council home systems over a decade ago. These weapons could accelerate a star's fusion reaction and turn it into a red giant within days. The Saurian system, the Vrelian system, and the Tokmar system all had active devices waiting for a signal from Earth. Billions of lives hung in the balance. Vrantic accused her of lying and bluffing. No species had the technology to affect stars in such a way. It violated fundamental laws of physics that had been proven over millions of years of scientific study. Karen shrugged and told him he was welcome to test whether she was telling the truth. All it would take was one aggressive move by Council forces and Earth would send the activation signal. She personally hoped he would try because the universe would be better off without the Saurian Empire. Counselor Dresch spoke up for the first time since the meeting began. His telepathic voice carried a note of resignation as he asked Karen what humanity wanted. She had made it clear that Earth could destroy the Council if they chose to, so what were the terms for stopping this attack? What would it take for humanity to stand down and return to peaceful relations? Karen's expression hardened as she looked at each counselor in turn. She told them that Daniel Brooks had died because he saved innocent lives from certain death. The Council had murdered him to prove a point about their authority and power. Now humanity would prove their own point. There would be no return to the way things were before. The galaxy was going to change and the Council would either accept that change or be swept away by it. Vrantic started to respond, but Karen cut him off with a sharp gesture. She said that Earth's terms would be delivered by President Carter herself, once the Council proved they were ready to listen. Until then, the blockades would remain in place and the Star Killers would stay armed. She suggested they use this time to think carefully about how they had treated younger species, and whether that treatment was truly just. Then she turned and walked toward the exit with her head high, leaving the counselor staring after her in stunned silence. Captain Ryan Foster stood on the bridge of the human warship Retribution, watching the stars shift on the view screen as his vessel dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Before him hung the massive structure of Helion Reach, the largest military shipyard the Galactic Council had ever constructed. The station was 15 kilometers long and housed the construction facilities for Council dreadnoughts, along with repair bays and ammunition storage that could supply an entire fleet for years. Taking it out would cripple the Council's ability to replace ships for the next decade. Ryan was 38 years old and had been commanding warships since he was 25. He had served in the hidden fleet that Earth maintained far from Council eyes, protecting human colonies that the Council did not know existed. He had trained for this moment his entire career, but never actually believed it would come. The idea that Earth would reveal its strength and go to war with the Council had always seemed like a distant possibility. Now it was reality, and his orders were clear. The communication officer at his left called out that all ships in the strike force had arrived and were taking positions. Ryan had 40 vessels under his command, ranging from heavy battleships to fast attack cruisers. It was a fraction of what the Council had at Helion Reach, but that did not matter. Human weapons technology was 50 years ahead of anything the Council possessed. The upcoming battle would not be close. On Earth, President Helen Carter sat in the Oval Office of the White House with cameras pointed at her face. In 5 minutes, she would address not just her own people, but the entire human diaspora across 40 different worlds. She would explain why Daniel Brooks had to die and why Earth had chosen this path. The speech had been written and rewritten a dozen times over the past 6 hours. Every word had been carefully selected to convey strength without cruelty and determination, without hatred. The president was 56 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much in her 8 years of leadership. She had hoped to be remembered as the president who expanded human presence in the galaxy through peaceful cooperation. Instead, she would be known as the one who started a war. But as she reviewed her notes one more time, she knew in her heart that this was the right choice. The Council had murdered a good man, and someone had to stand up to their tyranny. The red light on the camera turned green, indicating that the broadcast was live. Helen looked directly into the lens and began speaking in a voice that was calm, but filled with emotion. She told the story of Daniel Brooks and his choice to save innocent lives, even knowing it would cost him everything. She described his trial and execution, and the Council's arrogant belief that humanity would simply accept this injustice. Then her voice grew harder as she explained that Earth would not accept it and could not let such an act go unanswered. The president revealed the truth about humanity's hidden strength and the 20 years of deception that had fooled the Council completely. She explained that Earth had always known this moment might come and had prepared accordingly. The Doomsday Protocol was not a hasty revenge plan, but a carefully constructed response designed to change the balance of power in the galaxy. She assured her people that Earth was fighting with honor and would not target civilians or commit atrocities. This was a war for justice, not conquest. At Helion Reach, the Council's defense fleet moved to intercept the human vessels. 30 Council warships formed a defensive line between the shipyard and Ryan's strike force. The Council commander sent a message demanding that the humans withdraw immediately or face destruction. Ryan did not bother responding. His weapons officer had already locked targeting solutions on each enemy vessel. He gave the order to fire with a single quiet word. The space between the two fleets lit up with energy beams and missile trails. Human weapons struck their targets with devastating precision. The Council ships had shields that could absorb tremendous amounts of damage from conventional weapons. But human particle cannons used technology that bypassed shields entirely and struck directly at hull armor. Within 30 seconds, half the Council fleet was drifting wreckage. Within 2 minutes, all 30 ships had been neutralized. Ryan ordered his ships forward toward the shipyard itself. The massive station had defensive weapons of its own, and they opened fire as the human fleet approached. Energy bolts that could punch through a mountain struck the Retribution's shields and were absorbed harmlessly. Human shield technology used quantum field manipulation that made them orders of magnitude more effective than Council designs. The shipyard's weapons were impressive but completely inadequate for the task. The Retribution and her sister ships moved into close range and began systematically destroying the station's critical systems. Ryan had strict orders not to target habitation areas or sections where workers might be sheltering. His weapons officer carefully selected each shot to disable construction facilities and military installations while avoiding casualties whenever possible. This precision required more time than simply obliterating the entire structure, but it was necessary. Earth wanted to prove their superiority, not their brutality. Admiral Peter Grant watched the battle. From his command center beneath the Pacific Ocean, dozens of screens showed different engagements happening across Council space. Human forces were achieving victory after victory with minimal losses. The Council's vaunted military was being systematically dismantled by ships they had not known existed until a few hours ago. It was exactly what the simulations had predicted, but seeing it happen in reality still felt surreal. The Admiral opened a secure channel to Dr. Lisa Morgan, who was in a different part of the facility monitoring the Starkiller devices. Her face appeared on his screen looking pale and stressed. He asked if she was ready to proceed with Phase 3 of the protocol. She hesitated for a long moment before nodding. The activation sequence for the stellar weapons was already programmed and waiting. All she had to do was send the signal. Lisa's hands moved across her console, entering the codes that would doom 3 solar systems. The quantum collapse devices hidden in the Saurian Vrelian and Takamar home systems received their instructions and began the process of accelerating each star's fusion reaction. The effect would not be immediate. The stars would slowly expand over the next 5 days, giving those civilizations time to evacuate their populations. But their homeworlds would be destroyed, and their species would become refugees scattered across the galaxy. The Admiral saw tears running down Lisa's face as she confirmed that the devices were active. He understood her pain because he felt it too. This was not the kind of victory anyone wanted. These weapons were meant to be a deterrent that would never actually be used. But the Council had forced Earth's hand, and now billions of innocent people would lose their homes. The fact that they would survive to find new homes was small comfort. On Zenith Prime, Karen Hayes sat in her detention cell watching the news feeds from across Council space. The guards had not bothered to block her access to information since there was no point anymore. She watched as human fleets dismantled Council infrastructure with brutal efficiency. She saw reports of communication networks failing and trade routes collapsing. The galaxy that had existed for 12,000 years under Council rule was falling apart in a matter of hours. Part of her felt satisfaction at seeing the Council brought low after their arrogance and cruelty. But another part of her felt only sadness at the destruction and chaos that Daniel's death had unleashed. He would have hated this outcome even though he had known it was necessary. Daniel had always believed that problems could be solved through dialogue and understanding. He had broken the Council's law because he believed in a higher moral code, but he never wanted war. Karen thought about the last conversation she had with Daniel before he left for his mission. He had told her that sometimes the only way to change an unjust system was to force it to confront its own failures. The Council would never listen to reasonable arguments or peaceful protests. They had to be shown that their way of ruling was unsustainable, and that younger species would not tolerate tyranny forever. His death and the war it triggered would be the catalyst for something better. At Helion Reach, Captain Ryan Foster watched the last section of the shipyard explode into debris. The battle had lasted just under 2 hours and resulted in the complete destruction of the Council's most important military facility. His strike force had not lost a single vessel, and casualties were limited to minor injuries from equipment malfunctions. The victory was total and overwhelming. He ordered his ships to withdraw and move to their next target. President Carter finished her address to the nation and the cameras stopped recording. She sat back in her chair feeling exhausted and old. Her chief of staff entered the room and told her that preliminary reports from the front were better than expected. Human forces had achieved all their objectives with minimal losses. The Council was in complete disarray, and several member species were already requesting negotiations. It appeared the war might be shorter than anyone had anticipated. The president nodded but did not feel any sense of triumph. War was always ugly even when fought with honor and restraint. The Galactic Council chamber looked different now than it had 4 days ago when Daniel Brooks died. The crystal walls were the same, and the 12 seats still formed their ancient circle, but everything else had changed. Half the counselors sat with their heads bowed in defeat, while the others stared at the human delegation with expressions that mixed fear and hatred in equal measure. Counselor Vrantic was absent from his seat, because his species was busy evacuating their homeworld before their sun expanded and consumed it. Ambassador Lisa. Chen walked into the chamber with a confidence that no human had shown in this place before. She was 61 years old, and had spent 40 years in diplomatic service representing Earth across the galaxy. She had been Daniel Brooks' mentor and the person who trained him in the delicate art of negotiating with alien species. When the council executed him, they had made their biggest mistake because Lisa was not nearly as patient or forgiving as her former student had been. Behind Lisa walked Admiral Peter Grant and Dr. Lisa Morgan, along with a security detail of 6 human soldiers. The presence of armed guards in the council chamber was itself an insult, since weapons had been forbidden in this space for thousands of years. But the council was in no position to object. Their fleets had been shattered, and their infrastructure was in ruins. 3 of their homeworlds were counting down to destruction. They had sued for peace after 72 hours of getting systematically dismantled by a species they had considered. Primitive President Helen Carter appeared on the large viewing screen that dominated one wall of the chamber. She had chosen not to attend in person, because Earth's leader did not need to come begging to this place. The council would hear her terms from their seats while she spoke from the comfort of her office. It was a calculated show of dominance that made several counselors flinch when her image appeared. The president began speaking without any formal greeting or acknowledgement of the council's authority. She said that the Galactic Council, as it currently existed, would be dissolved effective immediately. 12 species had ruled the galaxy for far too long, making decisions that affected billions without input from those they claimed to govern. That system was broken and corrupt and would not continue. In its place would rise something new called the Galactic Union, where every species had an equal voice regardless of age or power. Counselor Mirvana pulsed with dim light as she asked what would happen if the council refused these terms. President Carter's expression did not change as she explained that refusal was not an option. Earth controlled the military situation completely and could continue the destruction indefinitely. The Star Killers in 3 systems would proceed with their countdown unless the council accepted every demand. She was not here to negotiate but to inform them of the new reality. Ambassador Chen stepped forward and began reading from a datapad that contained Earth's complete list of requirements. First, the council would issue a formal apology for the execution of Commander Daniel Brooks and acknowledge that their judgment had been wrong. The non-interference directive that he had been killed for violating would be completely rewritten. No species could be punished for showing compassion or saving innocent lives. The new law would prioritize moral action over rigid rules. Second, the structure of galactic governance would change completely. The Union would have a representative assembly where every member species had delegates proportional to their population. Decisions would be made by majority vote rather than by the decree of ancient powers. Humanity would have equal representation despite being one of the younger species. This provision caused several counselors to protest loudly, but Lisa simply continued reading as if they had not spoken. Third and most important, the council's military monopoly would end. Earth would share defensive technology with all member species to ensure that no single power could dominate through force. The massive fleets that the council had used to enforce their will would be broken up and redistributed. Every world would have the right to defend itself without needing permission from a central authority. The age of ruling through intimidation was over. Counselor Dresch spoke up with his telepathic voice carrying across the chamber. He asked how the Union could function if every species had equal military power. Would that not lead to constant warfare as different groups pursued their own interests without a strong authority to maintain order? Ambassador Chen smiled coldly and replied that the Council had maintained order through fear and oppression. The Union would maintain order through cooperation and mutual benefit. If species could not learn to work together without a boot on their necks, then perhaps they did not deserve peace. Dr. Morgan approached the center of the chamber and activated a holographic display showing the 3 stars that were currently expanding toward red giant phase. She explained that Earth had the ability to reverse the process and save those worlds, but would only do so once the Council accepted all terms without reservation. Billions of lives hung in the balance and the clock was ticking. She suggested they stop wasting time with pointless protests and start thinking about their people. The counselors huddled together, conferring in their various languages through translation devices. Admiral Grant watched them with arms crossed and face expressionless. He had seen this kind of negotiation before when dealing with hostile forces who refused to accept defeat. Pride always made them hesitate even when the logical choice was obvious. Eventually, someone would realize that accepting the terms was better than losing everything. It was Counselor Mirvana who broke first. Her light pulsed in the pattern that indicated acceptance and agreement. She said that the Lyran Collective would support the creation of the Galactic Union and accept all of Earth's conditions. Her species had always valued wisdom over pride, and she could see that continuing to resist would only bring more destruction. Several other counselors quickly followed her lead, not wanting to be the last holdouts. Counselor Vortic, who had replaced his executed father as representative of the Saurian Empire, was the last to agree. His voice was filled with barely controlled rage as he accepted the terms. He said that his people would remember this humiliation, and that humanity had made an eternal enemy. Ambassador Chen told him that Earth was not concerned with making friends among those who murdered innocents. If the Saurians wanted to hold a grudge, then that was their choice, but they would do so without any power to act on it. President Carter gave the order, and Dr. Morgan sent the deactivation codes to the Starkiller devices. The quantum collapse process reversed, and the 3 endangered suns began returning to normal fusion cycles. Within hours, the evacuation fleets received confirmation that their worlds would survive. The crisis was over, but the message had been delivered. Earth had the power to destroy, but chose mercy instead. That combination of strength and restraint was something the Council had never possessed. Over the following weeks, the transition from Council to Union began. Representatives from hundreds of species descended on Zenith Prime to participate in the first true democratic assembly the galaxy had ever seen. Ancient races found themselves sitting beside species they had barely noticed before. Heated debates filled the halls as different groups argued about laws and policies and the future direction of civilization. It was messy and chaotic, and absolutely nothing like the orderly dictatorship the Council had maintained. Ambassador Chen worked 18-hour days helping to draft the Union's founding charter. She consulted with alien diplomats and human advisors, trying to create a document that would protect individual rights while maintaining enough structure to prevent total anarchy. It was exhausting work, but she felt Daniel's presence guiding her through the difficult decisions. He had believed in the possibility of something better, and now she was helping to build it. A memorial station was constructed in orbit around Earth to honor Daniel Brooks and the sacrifice he had made. The structure was beautiful, with crystal walls that caught sunlight and scattered it in rainbow patterns. At the center stood a statue of Daniel in his dress uniform, with his hand extended as if offering help to someone in need. Inscribed on the base were his final words to the Council about humanity saving those who could not save themselves and remembering those who harmed the innocent. The dedication ceremony drew thousands of attendees from across the galaxy. President Carter gave a speech about the cost of justice and the responsibility that came with power. Admiral Grant stood at attention as military honors were performed. Dr. Morgan placed flowers at the base of the statue, with tears streaming down her face. Karen Hayes, who had been promoted to commander after returning to Earth, gave the final eulogy, describing the man she had known and the principles he had lived by. The most unexpected guests were the refugees from Terra 9, the primitive species that Daniel had saved at the cost of his life. They had traveled across the galaxy and borrowed ships to pay respects to the being who gave them a future. Their leader, a female with gray skin and large eyes, approached the memorial and placed a carved stone at its base. As the ceremony